Welcome back to another episode of the Positive Persistence Podcast, where we bring you stories to inspire you and strategies to help you tap into your potential and become your best self. I'm your host, Ian Bowen, and today I'm joined by a globally recognized leadership expert, host of the CEO Show podcast, and CEO of the fitness franchise fitbody bootcamp. The trail he has blazed is nothing short of inspiring, from humble beginnings that started in a trailer park in rural Georgia to now leading an 8-figure international franchise. He is the epitome of positive persistence. My friend and my mentor from afar, Bryce Henson, welcome to the show.
Ian, my brother, this is an amazing moment. I'm super honored to be on your show and excited to be able to share some value with your audience today.
Outstanding. Yeah, man, I am just so psyched to have you here because you have so much knowledge and experience that I would love to share with all of our viewers and our listeners in terms of, like I said, being the epitome of positive persistence. And before we go into your story, I just have to ask, for someone who is uber successful and at the same time humble and so down to earth, where does that salt of the earth energy come from?
Ooh. Well, appreciate that, my friend. I would say I was blessed with adversity, with the two different looks at life. My father, who unfortunately suffered from drug addiction, gambling, and alcoholism. And then the other side of the coin, I saw a blueprint of goodness, of wholesomeness, and that was my mother. And ultimately, growing up, the vast majority of my later childhood in the Midwest, which I am so grateful for, we're both from the Midwest, salt of the earth people. I think it grounded me. It gave me a lot of humility. So even today, as I lead international fitness franchise, we're based in Southern California, but I always share with our franchise partners, our coaches, we might be on the West Coast and have that kind of vision from a fitness and fat loss perspective to spread our mission. But really, from a cultural perspective, we are a very Midwestern grounded company. And that's really thanks to my upbringing and thanks to my mother. So that would be the derivative.
Yeah, I mean, Fitbody itself is such a family vibe, and that's one of the things that I love about the franchise. But I really want to ask more questions about Bryce Henson and the man, the myth, the legend. And can you take us back and give us a little more insight? You touched on it there a little bit, but I was wondering if you could dig in a little bit more about your childhood, because I think that kind of lays, and I don't mean to tell your story for you, but I think that kind of lays the groundwork for some of your resilience and some of your grit and some of your ability to fight through adversity. So if you could give us a little overview of what your childhood was like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And by the way, I just love the message, positive persistence, because that's what we all need in life. I mean, at the end of the day, life comes at you hard. It doesn't matter what your situation, even from Silver Spoon, we all go through challenges and adversity. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to that and keep pushing forward. So I wanted to start there. I'm a huge fan of you, Ian. I'm a huge fan of your mission.
Thank you.
My childhood, I would say, was volatile. It was volatile. It wasn't all good. It wasn't all bad. It was just a roller coaster. And that happens when you have a parent who suffers from addiction. Again, drug addict, alcohol, and gambling doesn't make for a good family upbringing. So in many ways, it was very challenging to deal with that. But also, too, my mother tried to guard myself and my two younger siblings as much as humanly possible, from that situation. So it's one of those things in life, as you get older, you start to see things a little bit more clearly. But I do remember it just being volatile. That would be the best word to describe it. But as I, progressed, later into my, or early into my elementary school years, 6, 7, 8 years old, I remember I'm the oldest. I remember the situation and the tension in the house getting way more challenging. The verbal arguments started escalating. My mother's a sweet lady. All she wanted to do was raise a family, her 3 kids, and with a good guy that would, be the breadwinner of the house, and she could, really make sure the kids were raised. And that was her dream and her vision. It's just, unfortunately, for her, she picked the wrong guy. But fortunately for my siblings and I, she picked that guy because, that's why we're here. But ultimately, as those, the tension increased, it ultimately got physical. And at that point, when the physicality got entered the situation, thankfully my mom had enough strength. She had to dig deep. She had been out of the professional working world for about 15 years or so, and she basically escaped with myself and two siblings, and that's how we made our Midwestern entry. Because at that period of time, as you mentioned in my bio, the first 8 to 10 years I grew up in rural Georgia, and my mom was originally from Michigan, and if it wasn't for my grandmother, we would have probably been homeless or in a shelter or even worse. So thankfully, my grandma took us in. But it's interesting because life has a dichotomy, because while it was very challenging and volatile, it was a really, really good situation long term for my mom to muster up that strength and get us out of that situation. The following handful of years were very rocky. We were in a good, more stable place with my grandmother, but my mom had been out of the working world for 15 years. She never really dedicated her life to earning income and all that. So, we humble beginnings for first world standards. I want to stop there for a second. I always like to preface this: first world standards compared to third world standards. And I think that's an extremely important message here, to never confuse the two. And really, while I had a challenging childhood for first world standards, I didn't really fully understand the world perspective until I was about 25 years old. And I'll never forget arriving to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was December of 2008, and I was just elated to be, on vacation, seeing a different part of the world. Also, where we're from, Decembers are just really cold, lots of snow.
Yep.
Brazil's in South America, Southern Hemisphere, opposite season. So I arrive, it's blazing summer, 80 degrees out. We're going to the beach. It was a really cool experience. But Ian, I will never forget driving from the airport into Copacabana, Ipanema, which are famous beaches, the nice part of Rio de Janeiro, but going through some really impoverished areas. And for the first time, I saw, kids in the street without shoes, without clothing, in the favelas, what they call in Brazil, or the slums is the English translation. So I think it's important to stop there, because from a life and also a leadership perspective is everything. In that moment in time, when I was in my mid-20s, I was given a dose of actual perspective, and it grounded me, and it gave me so much gratitude for the challenge that I went through. And that doesn't take anything away from the challenges, the volatility, the friction, all that I went through, but it just did a good job of putting this in perspective. So the fact of this podcast is about positive persistence. Let's face it, challenge is going to continue to hit you. And the only way you're going to be able to dig deep is actually take a step back, gain some perspective, reframe that, and then keep pushing forward. And that's really been my formula for success. But to put a bow on that, Ian, that was really the challenging part of getting out of that situation. It was a rocky landing, and for the first 5 years, we struggled. We ran out of money before we used to run out of month, and we definitely, it was a tough time frame. But to close this thought, the biggest lessons I learned in that moment is, number one, the value of family, the value of network, the value of proximity, and to see my family stick together. Number two, I also learned the fact that your work ethic is everything. You can cry, you can complain, you can have the victim mentality, or you can have the champion mindset. You can roll up your sleeves. And seeing my mom do whatever she could to take care of her kids, that was a huge, I guess, life-defining moment for me, and a couple of the learning lessons that I learned. And to finish the thought, adversity is your advantage was my leadership philosophy. So that quote unquote adversity actually became my advantage later in life.
That's awesome. And I believe that that's the same for everybody. But for some people, they don't look at it that way. They will look at adversity and let adversity push them down instead of challenge to raise them up. And being a leadership expert as you are, I wonder if, the situations that you were in early on in life set you up on this path to become the leader that you are. Because I remember a story that your brother Barrett told. You guys were little. I think he said maybe he was going into kindergarten, and you guys were going into the school, and he was like freaked out. He didn't want to go in the class, and you grabbed him by the hand and walked him in, and it's like, I got you. Let's go. And here's big brother Bryce, who wasn't very big at the time. I think he told a story. You guys were like 5, 6, 7, maybe. But even then, you had this leadership quality of, I'm going to stand in front of you. I'm going to take the slings and arrows. I'm going to protect you. I got you. Like, that to me is amazing. But where do you think that came from for you in such an early stage in your life?
Well, I think two reasons. I think there is a bit of factory installed feeling of responsibility that I've always carried. And the good news is, if you're listening to this and you want to be a more effective leader, whether it be a leader of yourself, your family, or your community or business, you can, because leadership is an acquired skill. So that's really the positive news that I want to share. But I would say for me, factory installed, I've always felt this burden, quote unquote, of responsibility, which is really the burden of leadership. So from a young age, I felt responsible for myself. I felt responsible for my mom. I felt responsible for my siblings, my brother and sister. So I think that feeling of responsibility, I mean, even today, I feel responsible for the company that we lead. I feel responsible for you and all my friends and franchise partners within the brand. I feel responsibility for the country that we live in. So I think foundationally, that feeling of responsibility has in some ways been a challenge, but the other ways it's enabled me to be a very strong leader, because in leadership, you have to own it. And there's no way you can own it unless you feel responsibility towards it. So thankfully, God factory installed me with that quality. The other aspect at play that probably led to that particular story, again, going back, my first 8 years on the planet, 10 years, I should say, was very volatile, living with my father. Now, my father, interestingly enough, I wouldn't actually even call him a bad guy. I don't think he has a bad heart. I think more than anything, he just succumbed to his addiction. He was a weak man, and he could
Mhm.
never just look in the mirror and really take ownership for himself. But in the first 8 to 10 years, there was many situations, not all. There's certainly good memories when he was sober. I think he's a good-hearted guy. It was, there were some positive memories there. But when you're under the influence, and he used to drive, under the influence with my brother and I, you start to the superpower that I acquired in that moment was you have a heightened sense of what's going around. I knew something was off. I was 8 or 9 years old. I didn't know what it felt like to be drunk at that period of my life, but I
Mhm.
could tell my father was not all there. So driving down the road, at night, I mean, my senses started to kind of wake up, and I started to understand situations and really sense personalities and, fear and happiness and all that. So while it was a very unsettling situation to be put in when you're 8 and 9 years old and your father's
Sure.
driving under the influence, it
Yeah.
actually created a huge amount of awareness for me. So when you combine the feeling of responsibility that I've just been factory installed with, and then through that really challenging situation, having the awareness developed, you put those two situations together. That's why, to, I guess, reinforce your story, when my parents split, and while I was in volatile, literally, Ian, it was when things got physical. We were living in Georgia one day, 48 hours, we were in a plane, living in Michigan the other day. And that story happened 3 days after that. Because, again, more volatility. Next thing you know, I'm from the Southeast, which used to talk like this, like a little boy. And
The-
then boom, we're pushed up to the North,
yeah.
and we have the Southern draw from the different Yankees. It
Right.
it made me be super self-aware, and again, I had a feeling of duty, obligation, responsibility to my family, and that was really how my relationship started and continues to this day with my brother and my family.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I think that for a lot of people, if they choose their most difficult, or we'll call it their weakest moments, they can find their greatest strength. And it seems like that's the path that you chose, to use adversity to be that pressure cooker that turned you into the person that was able to step out of that problem, that area, that issue, and use it to your advantage to make it a win for you.
Thank you. And Ian, to your credit, you used one word very specifically, and I want to empower the audience. It's a choice. You
Mhm.
said you chose to.
Yes.
And yes, I mean, human nature, you're going to get put in situations where your reptile brain doesn't like it, and you feel like lashing out and creating an emotional response. But you still have a choice to take a step back, take a deep breath, and respond and not react. And I think that's the biggest empowering thing or a big empowering message I want to serve your audience with. And I'll use one other example of this. And yeah, again, I don't want to discredit my challenges and all the things that I had to go through with a parent who had massive addiction issues that caused an incredible amount of volatility in the household. But, that perspective, Ian, is what I think is extremely important. And, a handful of years ago, our friend who spoke at our mastermind last year in 2023, Craig Valentine, introduced a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And Viktor was a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz. I mean, the most challenging, horrific concentration camp that single-handedly killed 2 million Jewish people in World War II. And this man literally wrote a book on how he did not succumb to, feeling depressed or feeling subservient to his captors, because he realized I might be in this horrible situation, but I still have a choice to how I want to handle this, how I want to respond, how I want to carry forward. So there are an incredible amount of other examples as well that I've been able to draw on for my strength to choose to be able to respond, in your words. And I think that's an incredible message.
Absolutely. And the way to put that is, what lens are you looking through, which again is a choice, and how you view the world and how you view your situation, which can then lead to how you're going to react and either succumb to it or you're going to change your situation and conquer it. And you've done that in so many different areas of your life. And I hope that you're okay with talking about this, because all parts of your life weren't sunshine and roses after you moved north and started a new life, because you battled with your own demons. And I'm wondering if you would talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a very humbling moment in time, Ian, where I too came to the realization that I had an issue with alcohol. And it was extremely humbling. And if you even take a step back, it was a beautiful situation. I'm so grateful for my mom to have that strength to get us out of that situation. But after 10 years old, I didn't see my father. I haven't seen my father in nearly or about just over 30 years. So I didn't actually see the full ramifications of the drug abuse, of the alcohol abuse. So interestingly, if you can look at it that perspective, I didn't see the big friction point with alcohol. I knew there was volatility, but I didn't really put it together until as much later. But I knew that the A word, the alcoholic word in my household, because of what the hell my mom had to go through, was not a good situation. So that word was used as if fill in the blank for axe murder or terrorist or whatever the case may be. Now, to my mom's credit, she never spoke badly about my father. She knew that he was our father, and she tried her best to speak as highly as possible. However, she was extremely critical about the A word, alcoholism, because of specifically the chaos that it called in her life. So you can only imagine, Ian, as I lay this down, when I wake up, for the first time that I had this sense that I might have an issue with alcohol, I was 27 years old, and it was after like a weekend binger. And I just kind of had this moment like, holy smokes, this doesn't seem right. Although, if you can believe, I carried on for a few years until I had the worst moment of my life in December of 2016. And, how that happened was, and to give a little bit of perspective, why I had a hard time realizing that I had an issue with alcohol, because I was not a daily drinker. When I thought of an alcoholic, at least the stories from my mother, it was someone who didn't have a job, was homeless, who lived under, a bridge, who drank alcohol out of a brown paper bag. And Ian, there's a lot of alcoholics in that particular category. But what I've learned is alcohol is a spectrum. What I do know to be true, it's a progressive disease. It gets worse, never better. So over the course of someone's drinking career, with time, it will actually get worse. But for me, even when I started drinking when I was 17, 18 in high school and then college, I never drank daily. I was what's called a binge drinker. I'd really get my stuff done through, the week. And then Friday night, my hair would go down, Friday, Saturday, and off to the races. And, through that experience, that's why I had a hard time. I knew that I drank alcohol. I knew that it was probably pretty aggressive. But as I was getting a little bit older in my early, mid, and later 20s, I realized, you know what? I'm actually drinking less frequently, but more aggressively, which then culminated in December of 2016 in someone dear to my life who I love and absolutely adore. I had a working relationship with her, and unfortunately, she too was affected by the genetic disposition. I look at, alcoholism specifically, but probably other aspects of drug addiction as well. There's a genetic component to as well. And I say this, I'm a recovery group, and it's very easy to see that a lot of the addiction problems that happen are generational. So, going through an experience with a family member that I loved and I adore, and seeing her have all these particular challenges with alcohol that were seemingly much worse than mine. She had law issues and, went to jail, this, that, and the other. And there finally came a crescendo moment where I knew that my working relationship could not continue anymore, because even though I loved her dearly, I had a duty, obligation, responsibility to my team, to myself, to my client, to my community. So ultimately, I had the communication with her and I said, forever is a long time. So I'm not expecting that. But for the next 12 months, if we want to work together, you have to remove alcohol from your life, because I don't know when I'm going to get a call from the police to bail you out of jail, this, that, and the other. You fill in the blank. After 12 months, if you can stay on that track, then ultimately we can reassess and then figure out the next step. And as I walked away from that, situation, Ian, and there was a lot of chaos that happened that led up to that particular conversation, I went home and it was just this like gut wrenching, heart wrenching feeling, because I saw someone that I loved, that I care, and I knew I was giving the proper advice, the good advice to really create a better life for her. But I also knew that I was being a hypocrite. So after that conversation, I went to sleep and I woke up. And Ian, I felt this gut in my stomach, and I looked in the mirror. And when I looked in that mirror that one day, it was like a mirror moment, something changed in me. I had a deep, dark look at that guy looking back to me. And what I realized in that moment of time is that our society will forgive criminals, but not hypocrites. And for some reason, I can understand that. And I thought to myself, there's probably nothing that I can do to physically remove alcohol from my loved one's life. But what I can do is I can lead myself. I can lead by example. In this painful moment in time, coming to the realization, like my life flashed before me, all the challenges that she had, all the challenges that I had, all the challenges that my father and my mother had. I thought, man, this is like insanity. This is insanity. Like, how is this going to continue? This cannot continue anymore. And that's when I made the moment in time to remove alcohol from my life. And to put a bow on it, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't easy. In fact, the first 3 or 4 months, I white knuckled it, which I didn't know there was a term for, just through pure discipline, removed alcohol from my life. But I realized in early 2017, about March or April, this was bigger than me. So I started looking for solutions on, the cure for alcoholism, et cetera. And I'll never forget, I found a 12-step program, Ian, and it was on a Monday night at 7 o'clock, which I still go to this day. And I walk in, and before I walk in, there's the door there. And it was like the heaviest door that I could probably even ever manage. It reminded me of probably our clients at Fitbody Bootcamp who have been out of shape, out of the gym for a very long time.
Right.
Opening that door vulnerable for the first time, it was the same experience for me. In the first few meetings, I literally just put my head down. I walked in the corner and I just sat there. In the fourth meeting, about a month in, and I knew logically that I was in a supportive group, but it didn't feel like this emotionally. And finally, when I stood up and I said, "Hi, my name is Bryce. I'm an alcoholic," and I had this fear, this like concern that everyone's going to point their fingers and laugh at me. I knew logically that wasn't going to happen, but emotionally it felt like that. But Ian, it was the exact opposite. This like weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. And that was really the first day that I would say that I've really made a big focus at recovery. And, not a fun situation, but I've been, blessed to go through it, and I'm a way better man for it. So to put a final thought on this, if you're listening to this, if you're going through challenge, if you're going through struggle, whether it's addiction, whether fill in the blank, what I can be sure of, there's someone else going through that same thing. Put your hand up, be vulnerable. It's easier, way easier said than done, but that will change your life.
Yes. Asking for help, getting a community. I've not had those same experiences that you've had, but I can relate in the difficulty in asking for help. That's a weakness of mine. And that's a total different conversation, a rabbit hole I can go down of why that is. But you're right. It is so much easier when you have a community of people, especially ones that have gone through the same things you have, that you can share with and build each other up and support each other. Amazing. Bryce, I have to transition to a question that I have to ask you, and that is, in looking through what I know of you, you seem to put yourself in difficult situations frequently. So, and what I mean by this is you told the story of going to Brazil. You, however, didn't tell the listeners and the viewers that you lived there for quite some time, and you didn't speak the language. Like you just decided, I'm going to go to another country, another continent, and not speak any of the language, and just see what happens. You also are an entrepreneur, right? You decided to sink your life savings into something that you felt passionate about and just went after it again, putting yourself in a difficult situation. And now here you are stepping into the CEO role, what you've been in now, of a international franchise. Like you seem to seek out the hard, difficult stuff. Why is that? Is this just in your DNA to like just let me just try something that seems impossible and see what happens?
My wife think I'm crazy, so I'll start there. But what I learned at a young age is when you do hard things, it creates confidence and it creates, I guess, self-trust. And really all confidence is self-trust. And there was many times in my youth that I took the path of least resistance. I'll never forget, I quit my freshman year of soccer because I didn't condition myself enough to make a 2 mile mark at under 12 minutes and 30 seconds. And going through that particular experience, and I know, Ian, you won the state championship in your senior year for soccer in the state of Minnesota. Well, hats off to that. For me, I went to high school in Michigan, and I went to school with the most storied high school soccer coach of all time within our state. And he had very, very high expectations and standards. And to your point, I hit my growth spurt late. When I was 16 years old, I was 5'1". When I was 17 and 18, I shot up about 8 or 9 inches. So I had some challenges and disadvantages just, from my stature perspective. But if I break it down and being very honest with you, Ian, I quit because I was afraid to put in the work. And that feeling of failure, that feeling of quitting, it just never left me. And, again, adversity can be advantage. I look at that experience and partly it still causes me pain, but the other half of me knows that I learned a lesson and it made me the man I am. And I never want to live that way. So in my early 20s, I moved out to Los Angeles. I got fit. And what I realized is like it gave me so much confidence. I hired actually didn't hire him dollars and cents wise, but my best friend from college moved out and I asked him to be my first, fitness coach. And going through that period, he asked me for a 12-week commitment because he didn't want to waste my time or his time. And I'm so glad he did because that challenge and adversity was really tough. But what I learned in that moment, when you do hard things, you become better, you become more self-confident, and you become more fulfilled. And that feeling of fulfillment, holy smokes, is way stronger and better than the feeling of regret. And we know this to be true. I mean, just think about this little example. When you know you're going to wake up, and we've all done this, we've woke up on time, but then also there's been times where we hit the snooze button. And that snooze button feels good in the moment, but then we always have self-regret and self-doubt afterwards. And I learned this message or this lesson throughout this experience. So to dive into the story of why I moved to Brazil, after I got fit, I gained, a lot of self-confidence. I started going to personal growth seminars, and I'll never forget, I went to this personal growth seminar, and this guy was talking about vision and having intentionality in your life. And he said something along the lines of, you want to grow yourself from a self-mastery lens to the point where you can be dropped off anywhere in the world and not just survive, but you thrive. And when I heard those words, I was inspired first and foremost, but very candidly, I didn't know that if you could drop me off anywhere in the world, that I would thrive and not just survive. So I put that in the back of my mind. Additionally, I was a giant Kobe Bryant fan. He was a huge mentor of mine from afar, the Mamba. And one really cool thing, aside from him winning world championships with the Los Angeles Lakers, he spent 6 years in his youth because of his father and the playing basketball in the Italian leagues. His father did. So Kobe Bryant could speak fluent Italian. And I thought it was this coolest thing, this like world icon would dominate on the court. And not always, but sometimes he would stay back for the Italian press and give an interview in fluent Italian. I thought this was the coolest thing ever. So I thought in my mind, you know what? I want to move somewhere where I don't know the language. I can learn a language, because if I can learn a foreign language from scratch, holy smokes, that's going to fulfill me. I'm going to, be inspired by my mentor from afar. That's going to change me. That's going to rock me. And that's going to instill more self-confidence. I didn't know where that place was until the story I just told you back in 2008, when I spent Christmas in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And it was like love at first sight. So I went back to the States. I started studying Brazilian Portuguese. I took about 6 months of classes, and I realized like I was learning, but I'm not learning to the level that I'm actually going to be fluent in this if you fast forward the tape. And we know this to be true. Immersion is everything. When you drop yourself and you build a community, when you're in that environment, that's how you learn. And it became very clear to me, Ian, the only way that I'm actually going to be able to learn a foreign language fluently is if I go to a foreign country. And
Right.
I ended up researching this little island in the very south of Brazil called Florianopolis. And August of 2010, I made one of the most exciting, but also the scariest decision of my life. And I dropped myself on that island, and I stayed there for 2 years. And, it was an incredibly amazing experience on one way. I met my wife. I have a Brazilian family. I have best friends. I learned Brazilian Portuguese fluently from scratch at the age 27. On the other side, it was painful. It was challenging. After the first 30 days of excitement, like the reality of the situation took hold. I'm 7,000 miles from home. I don't know anyone. I don't speak the language. I don't know the culture. And I had many days where I thought to myself, like, what am I doing here? It's probably not a bad idea to pack it up and head back. But I drew back off my experience in the past, and I knew that if I took that path of least resistance, if I threw in the towel, I would forever live with self-regret and doubt. And I decided that's not the path for me, my friend. So I went full in, and again, adversity is your advantage.
Yeah, that is such an amazing story. And it touches on the phrase, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. But it also, what you said is so true in terms of, in order for you to thrive, you're going to have to be able to survive the hard stuff. And you dropped yourself into a hard situation, and you had that no matter what mentality, that burn the boats mentality, that whatever, enter your metaphor is the I'm going to make it or I'm going to make it. And there's no other option. That's it. And that was the mindset that you had. And I think that is so key for people to understand that once you take that position, once you plant your flag in the sand and you commit your mind, your mindset, your mind energy with your heart being your conviction, your heart energy, when those things are in alignment, anything is possible. And you are a living testament of that. And being able to do that, I mean, most people want to challenge themselves by reading a book. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to sit down and finish this whole thing. You say, hey, I'm going to go to a foreign country, not know anybody, and see what happens. That to me is just incredible. And, that I imagine, and I don't know how this is chronologically for you, but I would imagine that came before you decided to become an entrepreneur.
That's right. Taking a
Is that
step ladder
correct?
approach, and 100%. So if you're listening to this right now and you're like, holy smokes, that's an incredible story. Yes, I'm grateful. I do think it was an incredible story when I look back, but it's a step ladder approach. It's about, putting yourself out there, getting beat up, going through the pain, finding success, building self-confidence, and then taking another step. So it's a process to become mentally strong. And while I'm very proud of my growth at this moment in time, I know the mountain's still high. I knew I had to do more challenging things to unlock a different level of confidence. So the journey remains strong. Ian, one thing that you said that's just so, so incredible, the burn the moats mentality. And I want to double down on that, because for me, anything that I've really, truly been successful at, I've had to burn the boats and remove all distractions. But I also think there's another lesson there as well, is that you want to be calculated and, I guess, plan. So when I went to Brazil for the first time at the end of 2008, I was inspired. I was like, holy smokes, like this is a very cool opportunity experience that I'm going to take advantage of. But when I went home, it wasn't like the next day I packed up and went back. It was a solid 18 months of planning, of preparation. I, enrolled in a local language school. And then I started, meeting Brazilian friends in Southern California. I went to a couple Brazilian meetups so I could, engage with the culture. I started getting recommendations. If you could move to Brazil, I literally asked this question. If you can move to Brazil, what place would you move to and why? Because I went to Rio de Janeiro, which is like the equivalent of someone from Brazil coming to Los Angeles. But let's face it, the United States is a big country. If you just come to Los Angeles, that's just one little look. That's not experiencing the Midwest, the Southeast, New York, and all that. So I took a solid 18 months of diligence to make sure that it was a very calculated move. I landed on a really nice spot in Florianópolis, which was like the San Diego, Brazil. So I share this message that it's really important to, number one, do your research, be calculated, put some thought into what you're attacking. But once you put the research in, once you put the thought, once you create the game plan, you have to burn the boats because resistance is going to come. And then if you don't have that burn the boats mentality, you're going to succumb to the friction of starting anything new, which will be a travesty because you'll lose out on the fulfillment long term. So it's a dichotomy, just like there's a dichotomy in leadership and life. Be planned, be researched, but ultimately, once you create that plan, burn the boats, and that's how you find success.
Well said. Well said. And I want to circle back to soccer. As you mentioned, that's a sport that we have in common. And you say that you quit your freshman year. But if I'm not mistaken, as the story goes, were you not later on the captain of the soccer team?
So growing up, it's interesting. In my club soccer, I was the captain. But for my high school team, I opted out. It turned out to open a huge door for me, though, because my senior year, our football team was struggling. Our kicker specifically was struggling really hardcore. So I continued on my club soccer route, and I ended up, was the captain as a young boy. And even though I wasn't actually, from a talent perspective, I wasn't the best in the field. In fact, my senior year, my club team, I was the captain of the team, but I was probably the second least talented person on the team, but I just had the drive, the conviction. I had the ability to like pour into my team, get them fired up, rally them, around the mission. So that's also another good leadership lesson as well. You don't have to be the best, the biggest, the baddest to be able to lead yourself and people. You could be like me, who was scrawny, who was small, but still had this conviction in him to move forward. So there's a dichotomy in that. The flip side, going back to the high school aspect of it, though, while I did drop out my freshman year, actually after my freshman year, going to my junior year, as the story unfolds, an opportunity came with the soccer team. It opened up, and because we were struggling, because I had availability there, I joined. I walked on through one of the captains, who was my good friend, his invitation. And my first game of the season, if you can believe, I hit a field goal with time expiring to beat our arch rival by 1 point. I got carried off the field on my team's shoulders. So again, adversity is your advantage.
That is awesome. Wow, what an experience. Now, I want to double back on something you just mentioned, and when you talked about being able to lead others, which I think is maybe the definition of what people think of when they hear the word leadership. But you said you need to lead yourself and lead others. Now, why is it important for you to be able to lead yourself?
Ooh, it's interesting. Leadership is not about you, but it starts with you. In fact, my framework is lead yourself, lead your family, lead your empire. And yes, there's tactics and strategies and skill sets that you need to learn and acquire in order to be a leader of others. There's no doubt about that. It's a lifelong pursuit. But I would say, Ian, from my lens, 80% of leadership is an inside game. We all know the law of attraction, right? That concept got popular, 15, 20 years ago with the famous book and the movie. It is absolutely true. So if you're looking to be a leader of other people, which is a good quality, because if you can lead others, you can really force multiply the results and your impact on this planet. I would say stop looking outward, start looking inward. So leadership starts with self-discipline, self-respect. Think about this. Would you ever follow, and I'm not talking to you specifically, Ian, I'm talking to the audience here, but audience, would you ever follow someone that doesn't have a high level of discipline, that clearly cannot lead themselves? The answer is no. But on the flip side, we're all attracted to people who have a high level of discipline, who have a high level of integrity, who, when they say they're going to do something, they do it. When they make a promise, they keep the promise. So when I have a lot of my franchise partners, my coaches, et cetera, asking, Bryce, how do we be a better leader? My first step is lead you. Get focused. Have a plan. Write a manifesto. What are you about? Is your fitness dialed in? And I don't say this to be trite, but 80% of our population is either statistically obese or overweight. What that shows me is people are having a hard time through discipline leading themselves. So my coaching strategy, especially for entrepreneurs who are lead, is if you want to have more discipline and qualification to lead 80% of the population, just lead a healthy and fit lifestyle. That alone, all right, demonstrates to the world that you can lead yourself. And if you want to take it one step further, look like you work out. No one should ever ask you, hey, do you lift weights? They should just know by your appearance alone. And when you do that, what that shows the world, and again, not in a conceited, not in a pompous or arrogant way, but when you walk in the room and you're noticeably in shape, when you notice it's noticeable that you train and that you eat well, you take care of yourself, you are demonstrating to the world without saying a word that you have the ability to lead yourself and you have a high level of discipline, which then qualifies you to lead other people. So to put a bow to finish this particular thought, leadership from my lens, Ian, is about about demonstration. Can you demonstrate the behaviors that you want in other people? And this is why leadership is really, really hard, because you have to be the standard. What I've learned about influencing others is that when you lead yourself to a high degree, people will follow. The opposite is true. So to finish the thought, leadership starts with you. It's not about you, but it starts with you. And when you lead yourself, then you're able to lead others.
Powerful. Yes, absolutely. You mentioned the word standard in there, and I know that we had the opportunity to work with the amazing Ben Newman, and he talks about standard over feelings. And do you feel that is a part of leadership in terms of not only leading yourself, because that makes sense. I feel like that's kind of self-explanatory. When you are leading others, do you feel that is an important message to impart on the people that you are leading, that it is all about standard over feelings?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Super blessed to be connected, both of us, to Ben Newman. And I
Absolutely.
completely buy into that philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, you are the standard and you need to be able to execute that standard day in and day out, whether you feel like it, whether you feel good, whether you feel bad, because let's face it, we all have feelings. I mean, we're just meat sacks running around in life with just balls of feelings. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're frustrated. This is just part of the human experience. But Bryce 1.0 as a leader, if I felt sad or angry, I would let that affect me and navigate me. Now I use these as, I guess, internal markers. It's like if I'm feeling angry, if I'm feeling upset, if I'm feeling tired, these are markers. They're telling me I need to get more rest. I need to have, get more dialed into my training. I need to take a step back. I need to, have maybe a little bit of recovery time, but they're not going to
Right.
dictate whether I accomplish the task or not. So this is why discipline is just foundational into leadership, because you need a high level of discipline to push those feelings and make sure that you execute whether you feel like it or not. And when you can start unlocking that level of discipline and you can truly buy into the philosophy standards over feelings, that's when your leadership of yourself and also others will absolutely explode.
Yes. True. True, true, true. And I love that idea, that philosophy. That is something that I used that I didn't even know I was using in my own personal journey of also enacting that neutral mindset, which dovetails right into that standard over feelings. And as you mentioned, like no matter what is going on, good or bad, I still have to do the things that I need to do to move myself forward. I still need to do the things that I have to do to move my organization forward, my family forward, or my whoever I'm caring for. Those things still have to be done in order for me to reach the goal that I want to reach, no matter what. So that standard over feelings is, as you mentioned, such a huge part of leadership and such a huge part of self leadership. And I think it's really a cornerstone, because once you have that and once you live up to your standard and you're able to use another Newmanism, stack those days, that just builds, as you said, confidence. That builds into you want to call it, into your self dignity, into your self belief that you can, that you will, that you must continue doing the things that you are doing, because that fulfills you, as you mentioned as well. So, man, Bryce, loved it. Love having this conversation.
Awesome.
So many nuggets in here for our listeners and our viewers. But I want to ask you, in your story life that you've lived up to this point, what is the one situation, the biggest test of your mettle? What was the hardest part, maybe even the darkest time in your life? And how did you find a way to get out of it, to dig out of it, to push through it, to conquer it?
That's an incredible question. And there's been, many, I guess, dark moments, right, that we all go through in life. And I'm looking at the Rolodex right here. I would say, and this is just kind of a recycle of what we just talked about, was really December of 2016. That was the most heart wrenching moment of my life, knowing that the chains of alcoholism, literally the foundation that I grew up in that caused all this volatility, was resurfacing in my life. It was resurfacing for me. It was also resurfacing for some other loved ones, one specifically. And to go through that particular situation and then to realize that you have the solution, a good recommendation for that other person, but you haven't acted upon that self. I mean, Ian, that was the most gut wrenching situation of my life, because why it was so frustrating is I couldn't point any fingers. There wasn't saying that there was no ability for me to say, well, it's because this person's fault or this person's fault or bad luck. Ian, this was all
Right.
about me. So when I had that like mirror moment, when I looked in the mirror and realized that I had caused this, and the only way that I'm going to potentially help my loved one in need is if I can take back the reins and lead myself. It was an extremely humbling moment in time, and the self-doubt and the frustration and the pain that I was experiencing in that moment just surfaced to a core. Also knowing that I had a problem with a foreign substance as well. So like there was the emotional baggage, there was the lack of self-leadership baggage, and then also too the outside substance baggage, kind of culminating all into one. By far was the darkest moment of my life that I'll never want to experience, and I never wish on anyone. But if you're listening to this, and whatever your darkest moment was, maybe you have a family or friend, or maybe it's you that going through addiction, or you've had, some other outside force, come and cause havoc and chaos, which happens because life comes at you fast and it's not fair. You're going to go through challenge. Shit, Ian, I'm going to flip this back on you, and I want to acknowledge you so much. I know this question was about me, but I want to come full circle just to give the audience some perspective. And I've always felt really, really connected with you. But it wasn't until I want to say it was our mastermind in Florida, Orlando, Florida. This was in December, I want to say, of 2021 or 22. And I
Mhm.
noticed you limping a little bit, which I never seen before. It was very discreet. I noticed you limping. And Dana, who's your wife, and I'm, very feel very blessed to call her a very close friend as well. I turned to her and I said, "Hey, is everything okay with Ian?" And she stopped us. She's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" I was like, "I've never seen him limp that way before." And then come to find out, she, unveiled the kimono and gave me the backstory of your challenge, that happened, with your situation, your specific, I guess, would you call it disease?
Yeah, disease that led to spinal cord surgery. That was the life changer.
That rocked your world. And then
Yeah.
come to find out that you've had so much adversity you've dealt with, just to, understand the doctors say that you potentially will never walk again. And the next thing you know, you are a marathon runner. I shouldn't say the next thing, it took time, effort, and focus. But for
Mhm.
me, when I heard that story, I've always had an affinity to you. In my like love and care and attraction to you in that moment, number one, to go through that adversity, but number two, not to be the poor me, victim mentality. Because at the end of the day, you also see those people that bad stuff happens and they want to call the attention on themselves. The
Right.
fact that we share in that particular mental fortitude, you earned my respect that day. That day was a pinnacle moment in my relationship with you. So again, going back to this particular message, the positive persistence, for me,
Yeah.
it's the adversity is your advantage. However you want to frame it, friends, life's going to happen to you. Bad stuff is going to happen to you. You have the choice to cry about it, to have a victim mentality, or you have the choice to take a step back, breathe it all in, and realize, you know what? That's unfortunate, but I got to move forward. And that, my friends, the choice is yours.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. It is all about that choice, for sure. Now, I want to pivot to something a little bit different here, Bryce. And this is just a question that I've always wanted to ask you because I know that you are a hard charger, man. You are always pushing the envelope, moving things forward, full of energy. I have to ask, what is the one thing that brings you the most peace in your life?
It's so funny. It's my wife.
Mm,
Ian, for our viewers, it's interesting, and I'm happily married. I'm so grateful for that. I have a little bit of bromance with you, Ian, just our connection, if you will. But
absolutely.
your personality with my wife is so similar. We take the disc profile here. She's a high, what would that be? S, and a high dove, and an owl. So
Yeah.
conscientious and supportive. And her personality, it's interesting and very similar to the relationship you have with Dana.
Yeah.
Values are the same. The
Mhm.
values need to be the same in the relationship, but there's something to be said about the opposites attract specific to personality. And I'm a hard charging, entrepreneur, lots of energy, lots of life. But my wife, on the other hand, she's cool, calm, and collected. She's the most calm person I know. When you see her, what you see is what you get. So when the analogy is I'm here at our headquarters battling the day. I mean, there's always bad news, some sort of bad news that hits the desk, as you would imagine.
Sure.
But when I'm able to go home in a very peaceful setting and really connect with my wife, who's cool, calm, and collected, she calms me down. She's like the stability in my life. That means everything. So it's probably why I'm very connected with you. And don't get me wrong, I love my parents. I love my high energy people. I get that. But to your point, like who calms me, who centers me, it's people like you, Ian, and really specifically also my wife, who I have the opportunity to connect with on a daily basis.
That is awesome, and I feel honored that I'm mentioned in the same sentence as your wonderful wife, Tatiana. And it's interesting that you say that because my wife, Dana, is more in line with you. High
Yeah.
energy, passion, love people, and it's like that's not me. But she is my rock. She is my peace. She is can't say enough wonderful things about that woman because she is amazing.
And she would
But
say the exact same thing about you, the way I, process my life and, have all these great qualities, but also to seek such guidance and stabilization from her or from Tatiana. I know Dana would say the exact same thing about you, Ian.
that's just we are two very lucky gentlemen. That is for sure.
That's that's it.
Well, Bryce, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and dropping some serious knowledge and really actually some tactics and tips for people to help our listeners and viewers if they find themselves in that rough spot, if they feel like the world is on their shoulders and are backed up against the wall, how they can dig in and use adversity as their advantage to push themselves out of that position and actually win and move forward. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on here. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I truly mean this. You are a mentor of mine from afar. I've learned so much from you since I met you and am following you, and I just appreciate you so much.
Well, my brother, and I say brother very intentionally because that's how I look at you. The feeling is mutual. I'm super grateful, not only to be on the show, but also for our relationship. And we're just getting started. The best is yet to come.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So thank you again. And I want to thank all of our viewers and our listeners for dialing in on this episode. If you guys have heard something that you feel connects with you and you like what you heard, please make sure you give us a thumbs up and some likes and subscribes. And remember, as we always say on the show, stay positive, stay persistent, and mindset is everything. We'll see you next time.